Ladies and gentlemen, imagine something truly surprising. Most Americans today still believe that the US dollar has always been backed by gold under the law since the founding of the nation, as if it were an unchanging sacred tradition. Yet this is one of the most persistent misconceptions in American financial history. In reality, it was not until the late 19th century, more than 100 years after the Declaration of Independence, that Congress passed a law formally defining the gold standard. Before that, the young American economy operated mainly on commodity money. Spanish silver coins, famously known as pieces of 8, became the most widely circulated currency. Alongside them were banknotes issued by state banks carrying significant risk, and the paper money printed during the Revolutionary War, which lost so much value that people joked it was not worth a continental. There was no permanent central bank. There was no mandatory centralized gold reserve, nor was there a single legal definition requiring the dollar to be firmly anchored to pure gold. Even so, the system supported trade and economic growth despite frequent instability and volatility. So what actually gave the dollar its value during America's earliest decades? Was it the intrinsic value of precious metals? Was it the credibility of the young federal government? Or was it the real productive strength of the American casas? The economy. Why did the Founding Fathers choose a bimetallic system based on both gold and silver instead of adopting a pure gold standard from the beginning? And why did it take so long before that standard was formally established by law? Even more importantly, did that legislation truly limit the power of the government, or did it simply transfer that power to another group, one that was never elected by the people? At its core, this was a long struggle between government authority and market discipline. On one side stood Congress and the Treasury Department with the power to issue paper currency, enact legal tender laws, and expand the money supply to finance wars or support the economy. On the other side stood the natural discipline of the market, where precious metal standards adjusted automatically through the international flow of gold. That system protected savers and creditors from inflation, although it could also create deflation that placed a heavy burden on farmers and debtors. This conflict reflected one of the deepest principles of the American founding. How could the nation create a trustworthy currency without granting the young federal government unlimited power, like the disastrous experience of the continental currency, which had completely destroyed public confidence? What makes this even more remarkable is that the Constitution granted Congress the power to coin money and regulate its value, yet it deliberately avoided specifying a monetary standard. That ambiguity was likely intentional. It created room for future generations to debate the issue through the democratic process. At the same time, it planted the seeds of decades of monetary uncertainty. It reminds us that monetary design has never been merely a technical issue. It has always been a story about power, fairness, and the future of democracy. To answer these important questions, let us travel back to the earliest days of the Republic, when the Founding Fathers gathered to design the monetary system of a nation that was still taking shape. What do you think about these fascinating paradoxes? If this story has sparked your curiosity, please like this video and subscribe to Financial State Secrets so you will not miss the upcoming episodes. Together, we will uncover the hidden history behind the US dollar, the world's most powerful currency. Thank you for watching. After witnessing the monetary chaos that followed independence, the Founding Fathers realized that a young nation could not survive without a trustworthy monetary system. The crisis was severe. The continental currency issued to finance the Revolutionary War had lost almost all of its value, destroying public confidence. Each state printed its own paper money with different values, while foreign coins, especially Spanish silver dollars, became the primary medium of exchange. Domestic and international trade were disrupted. Credit became scarce. The entire economy sank into deep instability. It was in this environment that Alexander Hamilton, the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, emerged as a brilliant architect of America's financial system. In his famous report on the mint in 1791, Hamilton proposed establishing a bimetallic system, meaning that the dollar would be defined by both gold and silver. His objective was clear. He wanted to create a stable medium of exchange, build strong public credit, and attract investment from Europe to support the nation's long-term prosperity. In contrast, Thomas Jefferson and his agrarian supporters were deeply skeptical of banks and paper money. They believed that only metallic money could be truly trusted, protecting the nation from inflation and from the abuse of power by the central government. The Constitution gave Congress the authority to coin money and regulate its value, but it intentionally avoided defining a specific monetary standard. This was a careful political compromise among competing interests. The result was the Coinage Act of 1792. It established that $1 would contain 371.25 grains of pure silver, or an equivalent amount of gold, according to the official exchange ratio. Anyone could bring gold or silver bullion to the mint and have it coined into legal money at that fixed ratio. This policy of free coinage was open to every citizen. Both gold and silver were recognized as legal tender. The First Bank of the United States existed only for a limited period, while paper banknotes continued to be issued mainly by state banks, making them considerably riskier. This design was not accidental. The Founding Fathers had learned valuable lessons from Britain's monetary experience and from the failure of Revolutionary War fiat currency. They understood that tying money to precious metals assets with genuine intrinsic value would impose automatic discipline on the monetary system. The government would find it much harder to print unlimited amounts of money to finance spending or wage war without raising taxes or borrowing real resources. International gold flows together with Gresham's law would automatically influence the money supply, helping preserve the value of contracts and the savings of ordinary citizens. At the same time, maintaining both gold and silver created a careful balance between the industrial Northeast, which depended on stable credit, and the agricultural South and West, where metallic money remained the preferred form of currency. Looking more deeply, this was a remarkable effort to limit government power from the very foundation of the Republic, while building confidence in a nation that was still searching for its place in the world. The Founding Fathers sought to balance the ideal of individual liberty with the need for national stability, the fear of concentrated power with the hope of building a strong and prosperous economy. But could this carefully balanced bimetallic system truly function smoothly throughout the next 100 years? Or would hidden cracks gradually emerge, pushing the nation toward a new series of financial crises? The bimetallic system created by the Founding Fathers endured for decades and brought several periods of remarkable prosperity to the nation. Before the Civil War, circulation relied primarily on actual metallic money, gold and silver coins, along with banknotes issued by state banks. These notes were convenient, but they always carried the risk of bank failure. When the Civil War erupted, Congress passed the National Banking Acts, allowing banks to issue banknotes securely backed by government bonds deposited with the Treasury Department. This was a major step forward. It transformed public debt into a foundation supporting paper currency. During the brutal war between fellow Americans, the federal government temporarily suspended the redemption of currency into precious metals and issued greenbacks, a form of legal tender paper money. Gold prices soared during this period, reflecting the inflationary pressures created by wartime spending. Yet after the war ended, through a firm commitment and a determined effort to build reserves, the government successfully restored convertibility in 1879. From that point forward, greenbacks and other forms of paper currency maintained parity with gold, while the Treasury stood ready to intervene whenever necessary to preserve public confidence. As a result, the value of the dollar rested on four strong pillars. First, the actual precious metal content contained in coinage. Second, the Treasury's clear commitment to redemption and convertibility. Third, the financial credibility of the federal government built upon stable tariff revenues and the growing productive strength of the American economy. Fourth, the market's self-correcting mechanism through international gold flows, which naturally helped balance the money supply. However, beneath this appearance of stability lay a series of dramatic and often turbulent stories. Consider the bank war of the 1830s. President Andrew Jackson firmly vetoed the renewal of the charter of the Second Bank of the United States. He later issued the Specie Circular, requiring payment for public lands in gold or silver. Credit from state banks expanded rapidly, only to help push the nation into the financial panic of 1837. Or consider the Civil War itself. When greenbacks entered circulation, many families watched the purchasing power of their money fluctuate dramatically. After convertibility was restored, the Treasury had to manage a delicate balance, helping the economy gradually regain its momentum and return to growth. Overall, this system delivered a long period of relative stability with low average inflation. It protected the interests of savers and creditors, encouraged international trade, and supported America's powerful industrialization. As a result, the United States gradually transformed itself from a debtor nation into an important international creditor. Yet beneath the surface of stability, internal contradictions became increasingly visible. Banking panics continued to occur because the country lacked a reliable lender of last resort. More importantly, the deflation that followed the Civil War inflicted deep hardship on farmers and debtors. Agricultural prices fell sharply, forcing them to carry heavier debt burdens even while the dollar maintained its value. The bimetallic system itself created additional instability because the metal that became undervalued gradually disappeared from circulation according to natural market forces. Regional and class inequalities therefore widened. Hard money advocates in the financial centers of the East usually held the upper hand, while many people in the South and West felt abandoned. The system depended heavily on the global supply of precious metals and on market confidence, making it vulnerable to speculation whenever political uncertainty increased. Imagine a farmer in Kansas during the 1890s. He watches a family farm built over generations fall into foreclosure because wheat prices have collapsed, while dollars held in Eastern banks remain as hard and unyielding as stone. The system did an excellent job protecting the interests of creditors and Northeastern banking institutions. Yet it lacked effective tools for sharing the burden of deflation with the people who actually produced the nation's wealth. This was the deeper dark side of a system designed to impose discipline, but one that unintentionally widened the gap between social classes and regions. Economic pressures, regional resentment, and growing political movements accumulated until they could no longer be contained. By the 1890s, all of these forces pushed the nation toward a decisive turning point. Would Congress and the President have the determination to deliver a definitive legal solution? The cracks within the monetary system became increasingly visible as the nation entered a period of profound transformation. Industrialization swept across America like a powerful storm. Railroads expanded across the continent only to be followed by waves of bankruptcies. Rapid urbanization created enormous demand for capital, while large-scale silver mining drove the value of silver sharply downward relative to gold. Civil War debt still weighed heavily on the nation, and the prolonged decline in prices after the war brought genuine suffering to millions of farming families and borrowers. As agricultural prices collapsed, the burden of repayment grew heavier, pushing many into desperate circumstances. Out of these conditions, the populist movement rose with remarkable force, becoming the voice of working producers across the country. Its supporters demanded the expansion of free silver coinage in order to increase the money supply, raise agricultural prices, and ease the burden of debt. Several reform efforts were introduced, but they proved temporary and incomplete. One law required the government to purchase a limited amount of silver. Another later increased those purchases. Yet these measures triggered gold outflows because investors feared that the United States might eventually abandon the gold standard. In the end, they failed to address the underlying problems and were gradually reduced or repealed. The conflict had now become more than an economic dispute. It had evolved into a struggle shaped by deep regional and class divisions. The industrial Northeast, together with Wall Street financiers and creditors, strongly supported a firm gold standard because it protected the value of contracts, preserved confidence, and attracted capital from around the world. Meanwhile, farmers in the South and West, along with silver miners and debtors, favored bimetallism or expanded free silver coinage. They hoped it would raise crop prices and reduce the weight of debt. The election of 1896 became the climax of this confrontation. William Jennings Bryan, through his fiery and unforgettable speeches, spoke directly to the frustrations of millions of working Americans. In contrast, William McKinley represented the supporters of sound money and received strong backing from the business community. McKinley's victory was not merely the triumph of one candidate. It was a powerful affirmation of a national path that prioritized long-term stability. Tensions reached a breaking point during the Panic of 1893. Railroad failures spread across the country. Silver policies generated uncertainty. Foreign investors demanded gold withdrawals. The Treasury's gold reserve fell to dangerously low levels. At one point, it dropped to roughly $41 to $45 million. President Grover Cleveland, although a Democrat, strongly supported the gold standard. He was forced to turn to a group of private bankers led by J.P. Morgan and August Belmont to obtain gold and stabilize the situation. The event provoked intense anger among populists. It exposed the weaknesses of the patchwork monetary system. More importantly, it became a symbol of monetary power, gradually shifting into the hands of private financial interests. In the political atmosphere of 1896, that election resembled a direct national referendum on the country's monetary constitution. For many Americans, the fact that the president had to rely on private banks to defend the nation's gold reserves was a profound humiliation of financial sovereignty. The episode foreshadowed later debates about the role of major financial institutions and the responsibilities of government regulators. A system originally designed to limit government power now seemed to grant significant influence to a small group of private financiers. The pressure had grown too intense to postpone action any longer. The era of half measures and ambiguity was ending. By 1900, Congress and the president would make a final and decisive choice. The pressure had reached a point where no further delay was possible. Congress and the president made a definitive choice, marking one of the most important turning points in American monetary history. The Gold Standard Act was passed, officially establishing the U.S. dollar under a single gold standard. For the first time in American legislative history, the value of the dollar was legally defined by a specific quantity of pure gold. Every form of currency issued by the government was required to be maintained at parity with gold. The Treasury Department assumed the formal responsibility for preserving that parity and established a clearly defined gold reserve to back the nation's paper currency. The political atmosphere at the time was extraordinarily tense. After its victory in the pivotal election, the supporters of a firm gold standard gained control of Congress. The debate was intense and dramatic. Supporters argued that the new law would finally end years of monetary uncertainty, attract investment capital, and provide the stability the nation desperately needed after a series of financial crises. Opponents saw it very differently. They argued that the law represented a victory for powerful financial interests. They believed it was a betrayal of workers, farmers, and productive Americans. In the broader international context, the United States was emerging as a global power after the Spanish-American War. It needed a currency with the same international credibility enjoyed by Great Britain and Germany, both of which had already established firm gold standards. In many ways, this law became a true monetary constitution. It established a foundational legal framework that would become politically difficult to reverse. The reasons behind it operated on several levels. Politically, it represented the victory of those who favored sound money, bringing the long and bitter battle over silver to a close. Economically, the legislation was necessary to stop capital from leaving the country and to restore growth after years of instability. Strategically, it strengthened America's standing on the world stage, giving the nation greater confidence as an emerging global power. The immediate effects were unmistakable. Stock and bond markets recovered strongly. Gold flowed into the country at a faster pace. Public confidence improved significantly. The American economy entered the remarkable era of expansion that characterized the early 20th century. Yet this transformation also carried important trade-offs. It locked the economy into a framework that could produce underlying deflationary pressures and limit the flexibility of monetary policy during future crises. By placing long-term discipline and stability above all else, the act strengthened confidence. At the same time, it highlighted the enduring trade-off between rigid rules and the ability to respond quickly to changing economic conditions. The Gold Standard Act of 1900 fundamentally reshaped America's monetary system. Its long-term consequences, both positive and negative, would shape the relationship between citizens, the federal government, and the financial sector throughout the entire 20th century. The Gold Standard Act of 1900 opened a new era for the U.S. dollar. The gold standard was reinforced through a clear legal framework. It remained in place through the First World War and continued into the 1930s. The Treasury Department's role in maintaining monetary parity became more clearly defined. Federal revenue continued to rely primarily on tariffs and domestic taxes. At the same time, the government's ability to borrow and its credit standing in international financial markets improved substantially because of the greater monetary stability. Then in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act established the nation's central bank, creating a more elastic money supply while still operating within the original framework of the gold standard. The years that followed brought several major transformations. During the First World War, many countries suspended the convertibility of their currencies into precious metals. The United States maintained convertibility longer than most. Then in 1933, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the federal government suspended domestic gold convertibility and revalued the dollar. Finally, in 1971, the decision to close the gold window marked a historic transformation of the global monetary system. To understand the significance of these changes, we should compare the periods before and after 1900 with an objective perspective. Before 1900, especially after convertibility was restored, the United States operated under a gold standard in practice, but legal ambiguity remained. That ambiguity allowed the free silver movement to continue creating ongoing political instability and repeated waves of financial speculation. The monetary system relied on a mixed foundation combining precious metals with government bonds. Its greatest strength was that it left room for vigorous democratic debate over monetary policy, reflecting the interests of different regions and different social groups. Its weaknesses, however, were equally clear. Gold repeatedly flowed out of the country. Banking panics continued to recur. The nation also remained uncomfortably dependent on private bankers during periods of financial stress. After 1900, the picture changed completely. The gold standard became clearly established in law, with gold serving as the sole monetary foundation. Every form of currency was required to remain at parity with gold, while official gold reserves were formally managed by the Treasury. The advantages were significant. International credibility increased. Expectations of currency devaluation became far more stable. Economic growth accelerated. Large amounts of investment capital flowed into the country. As a result, the United States rose to become the world's leading financial center. But the disadvantages also became more apparent. The system became less flexible when responding to financial crises. It generally favored creditors more than debtors or farmers. Its growing rigidity also contributed to the later demand for monetary reform. This transformation fundamentally changed the relationship between citizens and the state. Before 1900, monetary policy was one of the nation's most heated political issues. Voters could directly influence it through elections as demonstrated by the pivotal election of 1896. After the Gold Standard Act, monetary policy became increasingly institutionalized and more dependent on technical expertise. The federal government committed itself to a clear monetary rule. That commitment helped limit the arbitrary creation of money. At the same time, it reduced the government's ability to respond quickly to the economic hardships faced by certain groups, especially farmers and working people. Over time, monetary power gradually shifted in a more subtle way toward the financial sector and later toward the Federal Reserve System. This represents one of the classic trade-offs in institutional design. Strong monetary discipline can protect an economy against inflation. Yet that same discipline may reduce flexibility and weaken social equity in the short term. Many economists in later generations, including Milton Friedman, argued that the rigidity of the gold standard was one of the important factors shaping monetary policy during the Great Depression, although the actions of the central bank also played a significant role in that far more complex historical picture. So after this long struggle, what are the most important lessons that it still offers us today? The struggle that lasted for more than 100 years left behind profound and enduring lessons. A monetary system is never a neutral instrument. It is a carefully designed institution that distributes power among the government, the banking sector, ordinary citizens, creditors, and debtors. The Gold Standard Act of 1900 represented a deliberate choice in favor of strong monetary discipline. It limited the government's ability to act arbitrarily, protected the value of contracts, and preserved the long-term purchasing power of savings. In many ways, it functioned like a monetary constitution, binding the government to clear rules designed to prevent inflation and the abuse of monetary power. Yet those same constraints could also deepen the pain of deflation and widen economic inequality. No monetary system is perfect. Every choice comes with trade-offs. On the positive side, the act provided the stability and credibility that the United States needed to emerge as the world's leading financial power in the early 20th century. It also helped protect the long-term purchasing power of working Americans. On the negative side, it reinforced a system that favored creditors and the financial sector. It contributed to the growth of long-lasting populist discontent and eventually made broader monetary reforms unavoidable. The act did not eliminate the tension between government power and market freedom. It simply shifted that tension into new forms, requiring continuous adjustment by future generations. Today, our monetary system is based on public confidence and the management of the central bank. Yet we still face many of the same fundamental questions. Who truly controls the money supply? How do we balance price stability, economic growth, and social fairness? Today's debates over inflation, the national debt limit, cryptocurrencies, often described as digital gold, and proposals to return to commodity-backed money all trace their roots to this long historical journey. The lesson of 1900 reminds us that what ultimately gives the US dollar its value is not precious metal alone. It is confidence in strong institutions. It is the real productivity of the economy. And it is the political determination to preserve the value of the currency, whether it is anchored to gold or to the rule of law and responsible governance. The history of American money clearly demonstrates that institutional design is never just a dry technical matter. It is a profound story about power, fairness, and the future of democracy. Understanding the past is the key to avoiding the mistakes of history. It also gives us the knowledge to demand transparency and accountability from those who hold monetary power today. I invite you to explore the original historical sources for yourself. Read the First Coinage Act. Study the powerful Cross of Gold speech. Examine the text of the Gold Standard Act of 1900. Follow the history of the Federal Reserve. Ask thoughtful questions about today's monetary policies. Take an active role in the democratic conversation about how we want the US dollar to be safeguarded in the 21st century. Only when citizens are well informed and hold monetary authorities accountable can money truly serve the public interest rather than the other way around. From the monetary chaos that followed the American Revolution to the marble halls of Congress in 1900, Americans have never stopped debating what truly gives their currency its value. Because in the end, that debate is really about one question: who holds power in a democracy? Ladies and gentlemen, if this journey through American financial history has inspired both your heart and your mind, please like this video and subscribe to Financial State Secrets so we can continue exploring more remarkable stories from history together. Your support is what allows this channel to continue growing. Thank you sincerely for joining me throughout this journey. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.